we all require a fresh white shirt every day. That's one. Well, just purely judicial reforms, well, yes, there has to be capacity building. Judges need to understand climate better. They need to understand environmental science better. And as rightly pointed out by Justice Aisha, and perhaps Jawad also mentioned it, science is critical, and I'll just come to that in a second. So we need to be upgraded on that science issue also. And I think in future we need to start looking at climate courts, and I'll come to that also. It's very interconnected, why we should have climate courts in the future. So there is a number of things that we need to be doing within the judiciary as far as building capacity to deal with environmental issues and climate change issues once we get done with some of our constitutional issues which are on our minds these days. But once we do that, I think there is a lot of work to be done at our end. And I think more judges ought to get involved and mainstreamed into the process of dealing with environment. But I think if you were to look at the whole spectrum and you look at the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, I think the problem isn't that much of the judiciary. For the last, excuse me, for the last 30 years, we've been at it. We're coming up with one of the most robust judgments, which are internationally now hailed. They're fine. They're giving all the best principles there are. The disconnect is not the implementation part and where the executive doesn't follow what we are saying. So that coordination needs to be built. And let me just give you a story which is very important, it highlights the problem. 30 years ago, they decided, WASA, you're probably aware of WASA, the Water and Sanitation Agency in Punjab, decided to put up a filtration plant next to River Ravi because the industrial waste, contaminated water was going into Ravi and contaminating River Ravi 30 years ago. And for that, in order to set up a filtration plant, they acquired the land of residents of the area because they wanted to set up a plant. And this is a recent case of the Supreme Court, by the way. It comes to us at the Supreme Court 30 years later, and the residents of the area come forward. And they say, sir, they have taken my land 30 years ago to set up a filtration plant. There is no filtration plant there, even today. Please give my land back so I can do some agriculture or do whatever. So we start looking into it and we ask the government, what's the problem? River Ravi in 30 years would have been dead by now because all the contaminated water is going into it. What have you done? And they said, sir, the World Bank hasn't given us the money and we are working on it. I said, that's great. 30 years ago, you've been working with the World Bank to get... They said, so we moved on to another donor, then we moved on to another donor, and now currently we are renegotiating with the World Bank to give us, I don't know how many $1 billion to set up the filtration plant. So the judgment actually says that this $1 billion is not going to come your way. There is no way this is going to come your way. So you should have done something on your own. So that brings us to something very critical, and I want to underline that if you do not have finance, you cannot address these issues. And one of the major issues which the government faces is finance. Other than strategy, thinking, planning, and a number of other things, they don't have the finance allocated for this purpose. So we went ahead and said, you should have found homegrown solutions for this contamination. You should have found ways of dealing with contaminated water rather than waiting for the World Bank to give you $1 billion. So the judgment talks about thinking of your own homegrown solutions to address this problem. And I tell you, that is the answer. For climate change, for air pollution, start thinking about homegrown solutions. Nothing is going to come from outside, one. Number two, the funding part. We need to think of, and there are bankers here maybe, the Islamic financing, the Sukuk bonds, and whatnot. There's a lot of things that we can do internally, domestically. So we need to raise climate finance to deal with all these issues, or raise finance internally to deal with these issues. So in this judgment, we have said that climate finance is now as good as a fundamental right, because if you do not have climate finance, there is no way you can address adaptation in this country, and everything is going to be an elusive dream. It will not happen. The other aspect that I want to highlight is that, for example, we all understand that climate change and air pollution, they're interlinked, so I interchangeably use the terms, is the most serious existential threat in the country. There can't be a more serious threat. And I was kind of disappointed that the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister weren't even there to even come to attend this event to tell us what their plans are. Maybe they were busy, but that shows what interest they would have as far as climate change and air pollution is concerned, where millions of people are getting affected. So what we did was, a case comes to the Supreme Court saying, the law comes in 2017, and Rumina is sitting here. 2017, the Climate Change Act comes to Pakistan, and it says there has to be an authority that deals with climate change. The case comes to us in 2024, and a petitioner in a public interest says, there is no authority, sir. The only serious existential threat the country is facing, and the only law which says there has to be an apex authority dealing with climate change, there is no authority. The act was passed in 2017. So we called them, we asked the government, and I think even today, the authority is yet not functional in spite of our directions, one. Number two, the most important thing that is provided in the act is that there has to be a climate change fund. We asked them, and they very frankly said, not a single penny lies in that fund. So what are they doing? What kind of allocations are the budgetary allocations are there for air pollution? We don't know. So I'm just sharing my experience in the courtroom with you. When we ask them, what is the budget allocation for air pollution? They look at you. When you ask them, what's your budget allocation for climate change? They look at you. So we, as you know, it's commonsensical. If there is no budget, what's the plan? So there is no plan. And if there's no plan, things they will go on the way they go on. So my concern would more largely be, other than the judicial reforms that we should do and improve our capacity to deal with things, I think there has to be a mechanism for the government and the judiciary to work together and understand how they need to resolve these issues which relate to the ordinary person. And I think that is the critical issue which is missing. I think, once again, I go back to the same word. I think governance is a very serious issue. And as I see it in the last 30 years, there has been a lack of interest of governance as far as air pollution or climate change is concerned, and the results are in front of us. So that is the real area to work on, and how to build capacity within the government to attend to this issue, and how to bring in that political will to deal with these issues, because unless there is political will to address these issues, they're not going to be addressed. We can't, as court, run governments. We can't fix air pollution. We can't fix climate change. It's not our job. We lay down principles. We nudge the government to do it. They have to do it. And the second aspect is certainly that the civil society needs to be far more active to do something about it.